Hi everyone, welcome back to the Event Industry News podcast, the home of conversation that matters to professionals shaping the future of live events. I'm your host, Adam Parry, and today we're digging into a topic that sits right at the heart of every event organizer's responsibility: crowd safety. You've probably heard of Showstop and the Showstop Procedure, and if not, you soon will, because this just isn't just a protocol, it's a mindset shift designed to give those on the ground the confidence, clarity, and authority to call and halt to a live event when safety is at stake. Showstop is a result of decades of industry experience, collaboration, and tragically, reflection on events that should have ended differently. Joining me today are two people leading the charge on this. First, I have Mark Hamilton, a veteran in the industry, I think with over 45 years of experience in security and crowd safety. And alongside him, Steve Allen, the principal consultant at crowdsafety.org, with a background that brings fire safety, risk, and major public event planning. They're going to explain to us a little bit more about Showstop, how it came to be, why it matters now more than ever, and what the future looks. So Mark, Steve, let's start with the basics for those that don't know what Showstop is. Could you give us a brief overview of what Showstop is and why it was developed? Mark, I'll come to you first.
So, in a nutshell, what Showstop is it's an emergency contingency, and ultimately it's a decision-making process. And that decision-making process is either done through a collective on a large event where you may have a control room, or if someone's on the side of stage, it's a unilateral decision to be made in that moment. Now, that unilateral decision may be because the barriers failed, or someone's climbed a structure, or we've had a crowd collapse, which has now got trampling. You haven't got time to make a collective decision and have a powwow about this. You've got to make an instant decision because seconds count. And what the Showstop procedure is, from our perspective, is the fact of having that documented procedure in place for the undesirable occurrence, but equally having that confidence and the ability on the person on the side of the stage to make that decision when it counts, or indeed don't make a decision in terms of what's their risk perception. Are they going to be stopping the show too quickly? What is the restart procedure? Can they carry out a directive from the control room that could be, half a mile away from the main stage? Can they enact upon that decision to respond? And then is there a procedure to restart or evacuate the show?
And would I be right in saying then any delay in those procedures taking place, or maybe even any indecision on who makes the call to stop the show, that could be the difference between people losing their lives or getting injured and nothing happening and the show actually being restarted soon after?
I think so. And I think what the Showstop procedure does, it evidences a documented approach, well briefed, using competent personnel that have been trained in Showstop procedure, clearly understanding what their roles and responsibilities are, with a clear brief of exactly what to do, who can call what when. And clearly, if you've got someone on the side of a stage who's there liaising with an artist representative, well in advance, not on the day of show, well in advance briefing, final day of show briefing on the day of show, they're there. It could be a performance where nothing happens, but we've now got emerging threats. We've got weather. We've got, on top of that, temporary structures. We've got thousands of spectators, fans in front of the stage. Anything can go wrong. It's foreseeable that anything can go wrong. Even though we plan and mitigate to prevent that, there are always undesirable occurrences. So this procedure is proven. I've personally implemented it 32 times worldwide. Never a problem. Never. No injuries, no deaths, no problems with the promoter, no problems with the artist, happy fans that go home safely. So we know it works.
If I'm thinking about major events that have ended in some kind of injury or tragedy, is there anything any event example where a Showstop procedure like this could have mitigated or stopped anything like that happen that's of recent times?
Look, I think, that's very easy to fall into that, the obvious one. But I'm a great believer that hindsight is a wonderful thing. I know that speaking to the family of Madison de Beastie at great length, they are absolutely convinced that had there been a Showstop procedure in place, that Astra World, then there could have been different outcomes. But we don't know. Hindsight is a wonderful thing. I would certainly like to think that is the case. Most definitely, I would. That's my gut feeling. But again, I go back to hindsight is a wonderful thing. The fact of the matter is, event organisers take safety seriously. No one wants there to be an injury or a death or a tragedy, tragic outcomes at any events they're doing. We know that. We've all been in this industry decades. No one goes to start their morning saying, "Great, let's have this tragic outcome this evening." Unfortunately, though, undesirable outcomes do happen. And, often we have this setup called normalcy bias where everyone, they put it in the documents, but they don't want to believe it is going to happen. This happened here, then the ostrich goes in the sand. Oh, no, it's not happening at my event. It's not happening. Well, it is happening. We need to catch that in the early stages. Now, if you're in a control room, as I say, hundreds of meters away from your main stage, you can't necessarily see what's going on there. So you need to have confidence in the ability, the experience of that individual or individuals around that stage area to call whether there's a life safety threat or not. And if they can't see it, it could be a situation outside of the stage viewing area, like terrorism, like lightning coming in from behind the stage, like something else that's going on, which has caused the event control rooms to turn and say, we need to stop this show. That needs to be enacted upon. So, for us, it's about reducing that time to respond, as opposed to saying, let's all get together in front of the stage and have a big powwow. Should we make this decision? Because some instances, you haven't got time to do that. When there's trampling, fire, etc. You haven't got the time to do that. You need to make a rapid decision.
Thanks, Steve. Mark, I believe you might have had an experience with Paul McCartney as well. Could you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, not Showstop in itself, but the actual need to, highlight this as a key crisis management tool. When you need to stop the event, this is the only thing you have available to you. Once a performance is underway, then how else do you stop it unless you have a procedure that everybody understands their role and responsibility, and they actually understand the methodology and how to initiate, implement that Showstop. So when I go on tour with Paul McCartney, I send out information in advance, and part of that is, Showstop procedure. So it's an item on the agenda for the pre-event security meeting. And invariably, when I arrive somewhere and there's a discussion about it, when it comes up on the agenda, it's a very simple thing. All I'm looking for is the person with the role and responsibility. Should a Showstop be required in an emergency, whatever that emergency is, that when they come to me, they explain to me the reason for the Showstop, so that I've got something to give to Paul McCartney when I walk on stage during his performance. When I raise that at a meeting, invariably, then begins a debate around who that person should be. Now, that tells me two things. One is that people don't really understand what Showstop is, although they know the term. And most importantly, they've never really thought about who should be the person who actually enacts that. So who is the person from the venue who will come to me and actually give me that information? Because that information is really key. The information has to be delivered in a very concise manner, because this is a decision that needs to be taken swiftly, it needs to be taken decisively. And once you initiate Showstop, you don't do it half and then stop and start having a debate about it. You get the message, you stop the show. There is only Showstop. There's nothing else. You stop the show and then you either restart after a period of time, or you egress or evacuate the audience. They're the only things that are that follow. So the fact that I'm still touring the world in itself is remarkable, given how long I've been doing this. But the second thing is, how come I'm still going to venues which are operating continuously, major events, concerts, sporting events, and yet nobody's really thought about who that person should be and what's their competency. What's the level of competency? And competency can mean only 3 or 4 things: skills, knowledge, experience, and finally training.
And I guess you said yourself, Mark, that this idea has been around for a long time. Why is the Showstop course being launched now in 2025? Why did nobody do it prior to that?
Well, I think what's the Showstop itself has been around a long time. And,
okay.
And you know, I mean, Steve came up, you know, Showstop existed for a long time. You know, when I first started in the industry in the 1970s, stopping a show was usually done by the stage manager.
Yeah, okay.
It was very ad hoc, and it was all spur of the moment. And what it didn't do, it didn't join up all the other aspects of what's required when you stop a show. Now, that's maybe okay in the early days of the 1970s when gigs were in theatres. But once they started to take place in arenas, then stadiums, then big festivals, you need a far more robust procedure. And of course, Steve, in his role with Oasis, when he was head of security for Oasis, way back in the day, 20 odd years ago, given Oasis's, you know, audience and, you know, how, you know, dynamic they were, there needed to be a robust procedure. And Steve put a procedure together that was actually first implemented, coincidentally, here in Scotland, when Oasis played 2 shows on the side of Loch Lomond at Balloch Park. And Steve came to me with that at the time and said, you know, this is what we're going to do. What do you think? And I was like, this is great. Because it made it very clear who's all in the chain of command here. And there's no delay. There's no prevarication, because there's a lot of prevarication when it comes to Showstop. It takes out all of that debate and prevarication. It's just a very straightforward procedure. And of course, many of us have implemented that after Steve introduced it. But recent times, tragedies told us, and experiences told us, when you travel around the world and you're touring, that people still don't really want to take it seriously. They know the show needs to stop, but nobody really wants to think about having to stop the show and the implications. Mm. And the implications, of course, are wide-ranging. You know, going back to, you know, earlier in the conversation here, stopping the show is not an isolated thing. It affects the entire decision-making architecture of the event. Because everybody who's in a management role, who's responsible for something, who then has to command or instruct things to happen, will need to do something if a show stops and the audience is then leaving, whichever way they're leaving, whether they're just leaving normally or whether they're evacuating. So it sounds just a simple thing, show stop, and it is a simple thing to implement if you have the procedure in place, but it has a broader impact on the entire event.
Awesome, thank you, mate. Steve, you've now delivered 2, I believe, of these training cohorts. Has there been any feedback and surprises from participants? And I guess second to that, what's the plan as well in place to roll out more training across the UK and beyond as well?
Yeah, well, I think it's fair to say the feedback's been overwhelmingly positive, you know, and we've been very lucky to have what we consider some exceptionally credible people come on the both courses, US and UK. The first course was done in Houston, in Texas. Obviously, that's where Astroworld happened, and the course itself is very much supported by the Pink Bose Foundation, which have led the way with this. And really, coming back to your earlier question to Mark, why now? Last year, the Pink Bose Foundation reached out to us and said, look, you know, we'd like to do something to make events safer. Can we do a crowd management course, or can we do a security course? Well, we said, yeah, we can do all that, but there's hundreds of them out there. Some of them are very, very credible. And why should we reinvent the wheel? What's missing at the moment is a Showstop Procedure course. There is none. So that's how it came about, and the foundation, the family of Madison Dubisky fully supported that notion, and said, yeah. And the more research we did, we recognised that there wasn't a global standardisation. That was one thing that really stood out at both EPS and ILMC, the need for a global standardisation. Because you go to one venue over here and they say it's a yellow card and red card. One venue over here, it's someone with a laminate who you haven't met, but they've now walked on stage to say, stop the show, look at my laminate, I've got the authority to stop the show. And so they supported it. The feedback has been incredible. As I say, we've taken on board some other comments which people have made with regards to what else we could really emphasise on further. Because again, Mark and I take certain things for granted, but clearly there's an understanding or a requirement to elaborate on certain areas and reduce other areas. So we've taken that on board, and we're going to be, pushing that out with terms. In terms of next courses, Roskilde Festival were the very first festival to book a double date. So they've got a double date booked in May. I think it's the 10th and 11th. So Mark and I are flying over there, and there's a massive interest in rolling out more courses in the UK. We've got block booking interests, from various organisations, various venue management companies, event security companies, and we're also going to be rolling out independent courses as well, because the need's there, the demand is there, and in terms of globally, we're going to be pushing through a trainer package where we've already identified certain individuals that have got the credibility, they've got the background, and working with Professor Chris Kemp and Professor John Drury, they've devised a trainer package so that other trainers can then roll this out further afield. Dr. Pascal Vio in Europe from the Yes Group, he's going to be taking it on board in Europe and rolling it out there. So that's something we want to do, just really push this for to give the family of the Madison Dubisky and others that have lost people at events an understanding that the event industry does take safety seriously. And I know they do, Mark knows they do. But when we look at a first aider, a basic first aider, to put a band-aid or plaster on anyone at a festival or an event, they've got to have had a certificate. And yet here we have a decision maker potentially on the side of that stage saying stop the show or carry on, currently, today, haven't had to have any qualification.
Yeah.
So we look at it like that. And of course, Mark and I and Chris Kent, we do expert witness service. So, when tragedies happen, Mark, myself, Chris, and others are brought in. And these are the types of issues that we would look at. So what we've done with the course is worked out from an expert witness perspective as well. What would we be looking for to make this robust, to make a framework robust? And we're not saying that every single stage needs a Showstop manager, but there needs to be a procedure. There needs to be something in place, and that's down to the risk assessment to determine whether this particular stage needs a Showstop manager or whether it's a multi-stage festival with a smaller stage with me in it with a pair of maracas and a guitar. Does that really need a Showstop manager? No, it doesn't. However, if the terrorist threat was increased, it went to then you might want to reconsider that situation. So it gives flexibility for the event organizer, a framework, and an understanding, really, if it went wrong and I'm stood in the dock, can I turn around with full confidence and say, yes, I've done everything reasonably practically well. Legislation in the UK alone states we've got to plan for emergencies. We've got to. The guidance documents, they all say it. Therefore, a Showstop is only required in an emergency, in a threat to life safety. This isn't about someone having a little scuffle in the crowd. This is an imminent threat to life safety. What is that procedure? What is the delay? And what we're doing is reducing from the decision to the implementation. And the procedure does that.
Awesome, mate. Thank you very much. I guess we've only got another couple of minutes. I know you're both very busy at the moment, but I think we've kind of got one kind of final question for you. Who, if they're listening today, should be attending these courses, and where can they sign up to receive further information on courses as they roll out, either in their local area or somewhere that they can travel closely to?
Well, I'll suggest who I think should be attending it. I know Mark will as well, but from my perspective, this is wide open. We have two different types of courses. We have an attendance course where there is no examination, and they come along and they understand more about it. That could be more of an interest for local authorities, that are signing off on events, just to understand it. Because the amount of times I've sat in meetings and someone says, "Oh yeah, Showstop Procedure. Oh, that's great. Yeah, look, there's a document there, and on the top it says Showstop Procedure. That's great." Understanding what it is and what a strong tool this is, and then from the other side of it, you've got promoters, venue management, security, safety officers, risk managers, tour security, stage managers, production managers, anyone involved in the live event industry which may play a role within a Showstop capacity. And certainly the broad range of people which we've had attend the courses so far supports that. And you have that universal language then, everyone understands exactly what it's about. People walking around just with this lovely little pretty laminate authority to stop the show, and actually when there's a requirement to do it, they go into a catatonic state, some of them. And it's about giving them the tools as well to go, right, okay, yeah, understand this decision-making process, understand that I could have been on site all day and it happens at 9:40 at night when I could be a little bit tired and sleep deprived and all over the place. Understand the importance of it and make sure you've got everything set up for yourself. You're fully focused, and there's no question that when it happens, bang, this is who we're going to tell. I know what I'm doing, and when I'm challenged, I can turn around and say I was trained, I'm qualified, I'm competent. When I'm being challenged in that dock, are you a competent person? Yes, I've got the skills, training, education and experience. I've got that. I am a competent person. As opposed to being caught out with, well, have you been trained? Well, no. Well, you're not a competent person, are you? Why are you undertaking this role? And there's a lot of experience out there. And what this does, this refines it, and it just gets everyone on the same page. And as I say, the feedback we've had from very, very credible people is nothing but positive.
Well, I can say for myself, as somebody who goes to gigs with family and friends on a regular basis, personally, thank you for doing what you're doing and training more people to keep us safe wherever we are in the world. For anyone who's listened today, if you want to find out more on how to book yourself on one of the training courses or more about Showstop, go to crowdsafety.org and look up the Showstop procedure. And please do share this episode and tag your network in if you think it's relevant for them and they should be on one of these courses. I don't think we can have enough training in the industry to make ourselves and our attendees as safe as possible. Until the next time, thank you very much again, Mark and Steve, for coming on today's episode, and we'll see you in the next one.
Thank you
very much.